you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I am so thrilled that you came tonight for our Funk Family Upstander Speaker Series. I'd like to start by thanking our Anchor Series supporters, IMA Financial and IMA Foundation, and Nissan Foundation. I'd also like to thank our Anchor Series sponsors, Match Group. We are so grateful for your support of the Funk Family Upstander Speaker Series. This is one of our favorite series, and it's really incredible to have your support. I'd also like to thank our community partners for tonight's program, Dallas After School, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, Southwest Jewish Congress, and Temple Shalom. We're grateful for community partners, and if any of you are in the audience associated with an organization that should partner with us, please reach out and let us know. I'd also like to give a warm welcome to our museum members, our volunteers, our board members, and our generations members. We couldn't do this work without you. And if you'd like to get engaged and become a volunteer or a member, please go to the website and check out the options or call us, and we'd love to get you involved. The Funk Family Upstander Speaker Series, named in loving memory of Blanche and Max Goldberg and Fanny and Isaac Funk, was created to highlight upstanders or individuals and organizations who take action and stand up for the rights of others and combat injustice, inequality, or unfairness. Barry Black embodies those qualities, and we are grateful to host him here this evening. Bear with me. Our museum was founded by Holocaust survivors who understood the dangers of unchecked hatred. When we were building our new museum, we thought it would be fitting, given the origins of our enhanced mission, to remember those who perished in the Oklahoma City bombing, and also victims of unchecked hatred, and to honor those who survived. The museum is grateful to possess a sapling of the survivor tree, which is an American elm that bore witness to the violence of April 19th, 1995, and withstood the full force of the Oklahoma City attack. Upon your departure tonight, we invite you to visit the museum's survivor tree for a moment of reflection. As you exit, it will be on the right of the building. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Our moderator is James Dwyer, who serves as Senior Vice President in Bank of America's Global Corporate Security Organization, where he oversees the bank's threat management and security preparedness programs. Prior to joining Bank of America, Dwyer served for 22 years with the FBI. He was first assigned to the FBI's New York field office, where he worked counterterrorism matters, focused primarily on homegrown violent extremists. He was last promoted to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Dallas Counterterrorism Program in 2021, and was a great friend of the museum while he was in that role. Our feature speaker tonight is Barry Black, whose 31-year FBI career involved acting as a first responder to the bombing of Oklahoma City's Federal Building and other high-profile domestic events, including the Branch Davidian standoff in Waco, Atlantic Olympics bombing, and the 9/11 attack in New York City. Black has trained highly specialized counterterrorism units internationally. He's a member of Oklahoma's Law Enforcement Hall of Fame, an Honorary U.S. Air Force commander, and is currently on faculty at the nationally recognized Forensic Science Institute at the University of Central Oklahoma. We will have time for your questions at the end of their conversation, so please write your questions on the note cards provided. If you're joining us online, please chat the questions in the Q&A field, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible. And now I'd like to ask you to silence your electronic devices so we can all listen to our speakers without disruptions. It's my pleasure to turn things over to Jim and Barry.
Good evening, everyone. Barry, a pleasure to have an opportunity to sit with you tonight and to discuss your wonderful career and the specifically on this case and the fallout and the lessons that we can learn from it.
Well, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump into it. You had a remarkable 31-year career. Many of the highlights just relayed to us by Mary Pat with relation to presence at Waco for the Branch Davidian compound, New York from the 9/11, Atlanta Centennial Park bombing, and obviously the Alfred Murrah Building. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you to get into the FBI, how you got there, and then describe for me your career. I mean, a varied career, starting, I think, as a white-collar agent, and then kind of working your way up through SWAT commander or SWAT sniper, and then on to the bomb tech piece. So love to hear you.
Well, it's a bit of a strange story. As a little boy, I had a coach that was an FBI agent, and I wanted to be an agent since I was about 10 years old. Of course, that was Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., the FBI story, sure. Jimmy Stewart. And I kept in touch with that coach for years. He was patient. As you know, only about 6% of applicants are accepted to the FBI, but he didn't tell me go find something else to do, right? He encouraged me. My freshman year in college, I was in engineering. So I called him, and he said, well, if you're that serious, I'm going to put you in touch with a recruiter. At that point, late 80s, the FBI was hiring mostly accountants and lawyers, not engineers. So I was politely told, you might want to consider a change. I changed my degree, actually changed schools to get that degree. Wow. The FBI would allow you to come in a little early if you could pass an accounting exam. Somehow I got the degree, passed the test, and was sworn in when I was 24 years old. I was the youngest agent in Oklahoma for really many years. And as a kid, again with TV, I wanted to be on an elite team, the SWAT team, specifically a sniper, which is a pretty small group. I was selected for sniper school, and our first big deployment was 2 weeks after I got married. The team went to Waco for 51 days for the Branch Davidian standoff.
Oh, I'm sure your wife appreciated that.
Well, she's a saint. We were unpacking from our honeymoon, and one of her bridesmaids called and said, are you okay? And I thought it was a honeymoon joke. I said, sure, we're fine. She goes, no, I saw some agents got killed. Well, in 1993, CNN was really the only news station, so we turned on the television, saw what happened, and back then we had pagers. Sure. Nobody had cell phones. So the SWAT team call-out page came, and I recall telling my wife I would pack for 3 days. I said, this will be over before we cross the Red River, but I'll pack for 3 days. 51 days later, the thing resolved itself, and it was there. I was standing in the compound while it was burning, and that's the first FBI bomb technician I met, because they sent some FBI bomb technicians down on the off chance there would be some unexploded ordnance in the compound. And Jim Norman was a good friend I met that day, and he introduced me to the FBI bomb tech program. I was accepted to bomb school in '94, and 53 weeks later was the Murrah Building.
Yeah. No, I think one point that strikes me there, and I don't know that folks always realize it, but that our spouses and our families serve as well, right? And they, weather the deployments just as much as we do, and they have to deal with us being away and all those types of things. So it's a strong woman there, and a strong family. So absolutely amazing there. Take me to the morning of April 19th, 1995, 9:02 in the morning. Where are you? How do you come about hearing about what's happening in Oklahoma City, and what are the immediate steps that you take at that point?
I was still on the SWAT team, and I had an arrest warrant for a fugitive, and we believed that fugitive to be in a building at Tinker Air Force Base, which is about 7 linear miles from downtown. I was with another SWAT operator sitting in my tactical Oldsmobile, and the detonation occurred. Right, it registered 3.2 on the Richter scale, like an earthquake, a deafening roar. And of course, it's flat and windy in Oklahoma, and I could look over to the west and already see a big black cloud of smoke. Yeah. Again, pagers were the height of technology at the time, so our pagers went off and the encrypted, secure FBI radio. But this was 1995. Terrorism was not in the forefront. We heard potentially a plane crash, or a gas main explosion. And I was able to drive downtown. The boss at the time said, go do whatever it is you do. I was one of 2 bomb technicians in the state, FBI bomb technicians. Our evidence response team, which most people know as CSI now, I kind of wish we'd come up with that acronym, but ours is called ERT.
Solved in an hour, too,
Exactly, right? Solved in 60 minutes. It was all brand new, except for the first World Trade Center attack in '93. There had not been an event like this domestically. So my part was pretty narrow. There were wounded and folks that had not survived, but my very narrow part was what we call an initial assessment to see if it was a plane crash or a gas main explosion. Well, it wasn't. It was clearly a large vehicle-borne IED. And I'll point out, my wife, who had overcome Waco with me, was a federal probation officer, and she was in the building.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know where she was until about 10:30. She drove out with 2 other officers at 9 o'clock, 2 minutes before detonation, and I had driven by the bomb, got over to I-35 at the point of detonation, and that overpressure pushed their car. So she was, as grace of God, she's still alive.
Yeah, no, that's remarkable, and it's, you hear so many stories on folks who just by a minute or something, kind of avoided that, and there were many people who were still trapped in the building when that happened. What was it like for them, and what was their pathway to safety at that point?
Well, that morning was apocalyptic. When I showed up, I drove as close as possible without getting into the debris field, which may have contained evidence, and started that circular perimeter, assessment. And there were still people trapped in the building. Everything has to happen simultaneously, right? The first responders are trying to rescue people, firefighters. There were fires burning in the cars across the street. 300 buildings had been damaged. Glass was broken in about a 12-block radius. But we all have a very narrow slice, something you have to concentrate on and presume everybody else is going to do their part. So as I did my assessment, I asked one of the court security officers if they'd seen my wife, and I found out later he was lying, but he said, yes, I'd seen her. She was okay, which gave me a little bit of a respite. But later that morning, there was what they call a second bomb scare. I was up on the second floor, and I saw everybody leaving the building with alacrity. The first responders were fleeing. Well, you couldn't hear, just absolute pandemonium. But I turned around and saw a helicopter. I thought the helicopter was going to crash. Bad things happen in threes sometime. Yeah. But then I heard over a loudspeaker, second bomb. Well, standard operating procedure, particularly for bomb technicians, if you're killed, there's nobody to take care of the bomb. So our standard operating procedure is to evacuate. And I remember there were 2 ladies on about the 8th floor who were trapped, looking at me, and I was looking at them, but the SOP says to leave. And that was something that's difficult to forget, right. Is taking care of that second device. It turned out to be a tow missile, which is an anti-tank weapon. Obvious question, why is there a anti-tank weapon in the Murrah building? But it was part of a sting operation, and all the paperwork had been destroyed, and it was inert, and we were able to track that down. But it cost nearly 40 minutes of evacuation time where nothing was happening until we were able to recover that device.
When were you finally reunited with your wife? I mean, and I know, 51 days without her in Waco, certainly a lot sooner here, but, what was that reunion like?
She'll say I came home that night. I truly don't remember. It rained late that night, and I went to my vehicle to get some Gore-Tex, but my car was gone. I thought somebody had stolen my vehicle, which it was an FBI car. I didn't know what was involved in paperwork for that, but they just towed it away.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of paperwork. They had towed it and put a triage station there, but at some point that night I went home, changed clothes, got some rest. But you've been to a number of these things. Time sort of has no meaning at some point.
Yeah. No, absolutely, it doesn't. And ultimately, how long before everybody was evacuated from that building? How long did that take to get the 2 women off the 8th floor and to get everybody to safety who could be gotten to safety?
So many things have to happen at once. So there's the post-blast operation But then there's a huge investigative element that happens outside the crime scene itself. So through the media, we were able to pretty well determine how many people were still missing. We used cadaver dogs, and we discovered 3 probable victims, and we were getting 3 hits with the cadaver dogs in a section of the building that the civil engineer said was too unstable to enter. Yeah. So the decision was made on May 23rd. The bombing occurred April 19th. On May 23rd, we imploded the building, brought it down on top of this area, recovered all of that till we got to that one zone, and then we're able to recover the last 3 victims.
Yeah, and I think 168 total perished that day.
168 died.
19 of them children, and I think we all remember the picture of Bailey Almond and being carried out from that site, and what a sad sight that was. Turning to the post-blast investigation or the post-bombing investigation, how did you figure out who carried out the attack and determine their motives?
Well, it was a fantastic group effort. There were 1,400 people worked on that case for over 840 days, state, local, federal investigators. The FBI has jurisdiction over acts of terrorism, but we rely on our state and local partners to facilitate the investigations. But early that morning, Deputy Sheriff called me and my partner and mentor, Jim Norman, to what we call the rear end differential housing. It's an axle, and it clearly exhibited blast damage. It was twisted and was beginning to rust, which is a sign of the oxidation from the explosive itself. The deputy wiped some grease away and exposed a confidential vehicle identification number. So we didn't have cell phones then, so we took out a little pad and pencil that we all carried, and I wrote down that alphanumeric string, and Jim wrote it down. We called it out to make sure there were no Scrivener's errors, and physically handed that to a runner who took it to the command post, which was off-site, and we used our contacts. Now you hear it as InfraGard, but InfraGard didn't exist then. We had contacts at Ford, and they said that was a Ford truck that was built for Ryder Rental Company. Contacts at Ryder said they had built that truck and it belonged to a place called Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas, just north of the Oklahoma line. So we flooded that area with law enforcement, met the man named Eldon Elliott, said, who rented that truck, right? And he said it was a man named Robert Kling, K-L-I-N-G. And again, nobody had digital cameras, so we had a sketch artist. And Mr. Elliott remembered that Kling had come in to put a deposit on that truck on a Saturday, but wanted to pick it up the following Monday. And that following Monday, he recalled a second man being at least in the same building, may or may not have been with Kling, but that's where we got the 2 sketches you may have seen of John Doe 1 and John Doe 2. We published those, generated nearly 16,000 leads just from those sketches. And of course, which lead do you cover? You have to cover all of them. So we started getting calls that John Doe 1 was a man named Tim McVeigh. He was a security guard in upstate New York. Well, that name we had heard at a little motel called the Dreamland Motel nearby. A lady named Leah McGowan recognized John Doe 1. He had rented room number 25 in the name of Tim McVeigh. So we had heard the name McVeigh a time or 2. We had the name Kling, but we didn't know which, if either, was a real name. Sure. So the canvas in the little town of Junction City, we found a Chinese carry-out place called the Hunan Palace. And Hunan Palace had delivered some Mugu Gai Pan to room number 25 in the name of Robert Kling. Well, Leah McGowan said there was only one man in that room, and she knew him as Tim McVeigh. So now we knew McVeigh and Kling were the same person. So the night of the 20th, we did what's called an offline NCIC search. It's an FBI system, a National Crime Information Center, that police officers have access to. We just wanted to see if anyone had had any contact with anybody named McVeigh. And we found that Oklahoma Highway Patrol Trooper Charlie Hanger had arrested a man named Tim McVeigh about 90 miles north of the Murrah Building, about 90 minutes after the bombing.
It's amazing. A lot of work. I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, now when we deploy to scenes or when the FBI deploys to scenes, I mean, it comes with computers, it comes with, kind of links back to our systems there. My guess you had none of that at that point. I mean, nothing forward in terms of still working on old ACS and DOS programs. And
we had a brick warehouse about 2 blocks away that was set up as a command post. Leaked like a sieve. You're stepping around puddles, and hardline giant computers were brought in, hardline telephones. A lot of it relied on the old FBI encrypted radio system and physical runners taking information from one point to another.
Okay. Getting back to McVeigh, I mean, how obviously had some anti-government sentiments, I mean, which allowed him to, perpetrate the greatest domestic or the largest domestic terrorism attack up until that point in the country, and really still the largest. How did he come to those radicalized beliefs? How did he, what caused him to act in the way he did, and why did he choose Oklahoma City?
In a word, I would say just hatred. He had a disdain, a hatred for the federal government. He had served as a soldier, wanted to join the Special Forces, didn't make the cut as a Green Beret. After he discharged from the Army, he was sort of itinerant. He would just travel the country following the gun show circuits where people buy and sell guns, sort of living with his Army buddies. And we know he was at Waco. He was interviewed by a reporter in Waco. We actually used some of the photographs from that interview in trial to show intent. He was passing out anti-government literature, which you have the right to do.
Sure.
But that was 93, and shortly after the fire, April 19 of 93, he began to tell his Army buddies, Michael Fortier, Terry Nichols, that it was time for action. He had encouraged people to read a book called The Turner Diaries, which is an anti-government screed that starts with a large vehicle-borne IED destroying FBI headquarters and starting a revolution. So that was sort of his playbook. And in the spring of 93, after the fire at Waco, he decided it was time to take action.
Yeah. You mentioned how you were able to track McVeigh so quickly through a lot of great police work and the partnership of a lot of others. What led you to Nichols and Fortier, and how did that transpire?
So again, the partnerships that we developed now officially codified as the Joint Terrorism Task Force and these other joint groups didn't really exist, but the FBI makes a great effort to partner with our state and locals. So the command post itself included the military. Once we had McVeigh's name, he had used an address up in Decker, Michigan. Well, obviously we were interested in that address.
Sure.
It turned out to be a farm of Terry and James Nichols. Well, we knew from the Army Criminal Investigative Division that a man named Terry Nichols had served in McVeigh's unit in Georgia, and that unit had been moved to Fort Riley, Kansas, which is right by Junction City. That address was repeated a couple of times, so when we sent agents to Decker, Michigan, interviewed neighbors, they said, yep, we've seen Terry Nichols with a man named Tim McVeigh. We've heard explosions on the farm. They're both kind of anti-government sorts of people. So Terry Nichols was identified as a person of interest and actually self-surrendered. So we had McVeigh in custody the morning of the 21st. The bombing was the 19th. The morning of the 21st, we had him in custody, and Terry Nichols self-surrendered at 3 p.m. that same day when he saw us take custody of McVeigh.
Great. As we discussed earlier, you also present at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco in 2 years prior. Do you think the federal government's handling of the Waco siege provided anti-government groups and individuals with a larger platform for their grievances? Why or why not? I mean, you mentioned McVeigh was there. Thoughts on that?
A standoff like that, 51 days, had never happened before. Our hostage rescue team was deployed, but it was small. It was dramatically increased in size after Waco because the resources simply weren't in place because nothing like that had ever happened before. It was a platform. I wasn't watching the news, but apparently it was on the news every day, all day. When we would go in and out of the perimeter for our shifts, there would be concentric circles of protesters and media, then protesters and media. So it was highly publicized. And in the aftermath of Ruby Ridge, which was another event that got McVeigh's attention. The way Waco resolved itself, the FBI was under a gag order at the time, so we couldn't really discuss what had happened. But we had electronic overhears and thermal imagery from above that proved unequivocally those fires were started from inside three different places simultaneously. That never made the newspapers until years later, and it was proven that the FBI didn't start the fires. But that silence probably didn't help things.
Sure. Yeah, I understood. The Oklahoma City bombing was early in your career. Years afterwards, you were at 9/11. You were at the Centennial Park bombing in Atlanta. You provided technical support for national special security events, trained military units throughout the world. How did Oklahoma City and the incidents that you responded to, or how did, Oklahoma City influence and impact your ability to respond to those incidents later on?
The quality and amount of training FBI agents in general receive, but specialized units like the bomb technicians is world class. And I'd had the opportunity to train abroad, but for an attack like that to occur in the heartland, was sort of the epitome of terrorism. We anticipate attacks like that in Washington, Chicago, LA. Sure. But Oklahoma City was not on anybody's radar. And I think what that drove home was that if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And different types of training was ratcheted up thereafter. It's easy to go over what went well, right? But you have to take a hard look at things that didn't go well and then improve them for the next time, because there's probably going to be a next time.
So what do you think were the greatest lessons you and your fellow agents and fellow law enforcement took away from Oklahoma City?
The most critical thing was the ability to work with others, right? The movies don't portray the FBI in the kindest light sometimes, FBI, we're taking over kind of thing. That does not work well, right? The FBI certifies all the non-military bomb technicians in the country. There's only one bomb school. It happens to be ours. But we train with all of our state and local partners, all of our military partners. And it's those partnerships that exist prior to an event that make things work much more smoothly.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the work that you do beforehand and the relationships that you build and the decisions that you make way before any type of critical incident, pay dividends. And I know here in Texas, that we had tremendous partnerships, with all our local and state and federal law enforcement partners. I think, things like Oklahoma City probably only forged those even stronger than they were beforehand. And in your world. And so that's really how we get things done. No one agency can really handle it on their own. No one agency has all the resources, all the knowledge to be able to get it done. So very glad to hear that. According to the Department of Homeland Security, domestic terrorism-related investigations have grown by 357% over the last 10 years. The largest category of threats investigated are classified as ethnically or racially motivated. The second largest category is anti-government or anti-authority motivated violent extremism. What do you think that is precipitating this increase? And do you believe there has been an increase in fringe political beliefs and conspiracy theories, or are we simply able to report more information now?
I think with the advent of the internet and as society becomes a little more reclusive, COVID didn't help. Everybody was sequestered at home. But it's much easier now to be in your mom's basement and find people on the other side of the country or the other side of the world that have your particular unique bent of hatred. Whereas before you might have been alone. Most people, groupthink takes over. You might not do something on your own, but if you find that you're part of a group, then you might take action that you wouldn't otherwise take. So I think it's those disparate people are finding like ideas connected through the dark web.
Yeah, no, I think 100%. I mean, before, if you had a crazy idea, you were kind of alone in that idea, right? And now you have that reassurance and that reinforcement from people who you've never met, and in some cases don't even believe what you believe, but they're just there to egg you on, or they're just there to push as many buttons as possible, or they're there for ulterior motives. And so I think that's accurate. I do think that there is a greater desire for people to report as well. I think, a lot of those campaigns of see something, say something, Absolutely. And a lot of just kind of community awareness do have people coming forward, and I think we need that more and more, right? I mean, we need to continually to ask people to come forward if something's not right to bring it. I can't tell you how many cases I've worked, and I'm sure yourself, where after the fact we interview folks and somebody saw something, somebody said something, somebody could have potentially stopped that. And so I'm just curious, with Oklahoma City in particular, obviously we talked a little bit about Fortier, but was there anybody else there who may have been able to stop that? Was there anything else obvious where it could have been prevented if somebody had come forward?
Well, I mentioned Michael Fortier, one of McVeigh's and Nichols' unit mates in the Army. When McVeigh separated, he would often stay in Kingman, Arizona with the Fortiers. And after the fire in Waco, he told them, it's time for me to do something. He actually took soup cans from their kitchen cupboard and arrayed them on the table to show how he was going to place the explosives in the back of the truck. Lori Fortier laminated that fake Robert Kling ID. She said he picked the name Robert Kling because he liked the Klingons from Star Trek, right? So that's the mentality that we're dealing with. In December, prior to the bombing, McVeigh took 48 on a reconnaissance trip. They were going east on I-40, then north on 35 to see Nichols, and they drove by the Murrah Building. And Fortier said, well, what about the innocent people? And he reports that McVeigh told him they're like the stormtroopers that work for the evil empire. They have to be killed. Well, what about the children? Well, there were children killed at Waco. So he was able to rationalize this in his own mind. But with a phone call, the 48s could have stopped it.
Sure. You mentioned earlier McVeigh's interest in the Turner Diaries, which is, in its heart, a white supremacist novel. White supremacist theories remain a critical threat today. How have federal investigative methods and tactics evolved in recent years to match current trends in domestic threats?
It folds back into information. Information is power. I grew up in Alabama in the 60s, and it was said that the FBI had more informants in the Klan at the end of the Ku Klux Klan era than there were Klansmen. So as these groups are identified and can be infiltrated either through FBI undercover operations or people that tangentially get involved and realize these people are crazy and can report back, the information is critical. It goes back to the see something, say something.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I think the other thing that has changed is what we talked about a little bit in the radicalization piece was, the use of the internet, right? And so many of these groups are using the internet and are putting their information, out there and communicating through it. And I think from an investigative standpoint, law enforcement needs to just be as technically sound as they are, be up on it, be able to kind of write the right warrants and write the right paper through the courts to be able to get access and to see some of those things in order to conduct those investigations.
Sure, and the legal threshold is probable cause, right?
Sure.
So you can get information, then you have to verify it. These are difficult cases, and law enforcement in general does a fantastic job in interceding and stopping a lot of activity that's not publicized.
Yeah, no, agreed. And that we probably don't want publicized in many ways,
right.
Both from a standpoint of having people feel secure, and also for the standpoint of not releasing tactics and how things are done. In the context of tragedies like the Oklahoma City bombing, what does it mean to be an upstander? And how can individuals make a difference even in moments of overwhelming fear and grief?
I certainly didn't do anything special. I had my job to do, and other than basic SWAT first aid training, I really couldn't help people. There was one young lady, her children and her mother had both died in the blast. She was trapped, and she was only extricated after a doctor amputated her leg with no anesthesia, finishing that operation with his pocket knife. So everybody had something to do, and it's bringing your unique specialty, but sometimes you have to ignore some pretty horrible things to get to your part of things to make the whole operation work.
Yeah. For just folks on the day-to-day lives, I mean, I think there's, certainly ability to be an upstander just as folks walk, live their lives on a day in and day out basis. What advice do you give to folks, or what would you tell people to encourage them to be upstanders in their community on a day in and day out basis?
Just look for the kindness in other people. I have seen a lot of horrific events, but I think there are more better, good people there than not. Sometimes you have to look for the good, but I think it's there. And it may take a little time to warm up to somebody you find difficult to appreciate, perhaps. But I think we need to try to find the better angels in people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it, when these types of events happen, I think it brings communities together. Tell me a little bit about how the community came together, both during and after Oklahoma City. We talked a little bit, earlier about, not being able to buy meals or, a cup of coffee or whatever the case may be, for the first responders and rescuers. But tell me how Oklahoma City came together during this tragic event.
There is something now known as the Oklahoma Standard, to which other events are measured. I lived there, but I could come home and someone would have cut my grass, right? Because I was working 7 days a week, and the grass still had to be cut. My wife was nearly killed. She couldn't go to work because her building was damaged. And I don't know who did that, right? I had the opportunity to teach law enforcement military around the world. And I remember once in San Luis Obispo, California, urban search and rescue team member picked me up at the airport. And this was years after the Oklahoma City bombing. And he said, I was out there, because people remember. And he said, I couldn't buy a cup of coffee. He said, I came home with every penny in my pocket. They would go to eat, and the waitress would say, your bill's taken care of. We had search dogs. Their paws were getting torn up on the rubble. And so the media put out a request for, I didn't know they made dog booties, but for dog booties.
Sure.
And they showed up by the truckful, right? Oklahoma State University Veterinary College sent vet students down to take care of the dogs. Clergy, the support system first responders need was always there, and that standard is followed through even to the memorial today.
Yeah. No, I think we see that a lot in tragedies, the way communities come together, and I think sometimes it doesn't last as long as we would like. But I know we saw it here in Texas. We had a hostage-taking incident at a synagogue in Colleyville a couple of years back, and the way that community came before, the clergy from the Catholic Church and from the Muslim religion, and all just coming together, both not only to support law enforcement, but to support the individuals who went through that crisis and their families as well during that hour of need, was really a great thing to see, and I'm glad it was evident there as well. You talked a little bit about the bravery of that woman who had her leg amputated, and really the individual who removed it as well. But you've seen numerous, or been part of numerous tragedies, or responded to numerous tragedies during the course of your career, and a lot of challenges there. In those moments, how do you define bravery, both on a personal level and in terms of leadership?
Well, again, there's nothing special I did, but I think the people that are in this line of work, first responders, military, firefighters, have an inherent desire to help people. And if you can develop those skills that will enable you to help people more thoroughly, then you just do your job. As I said that morning, I sometimes wish there was more I could have done for some of the people who were suffering, physical injuries. I watched the rescuers bringing people out, but my job was the bomb, right, the post-blast part. And Chris Fields, the firefighter that brought out that baby that was on the cover of Time magazine, Bailey Allman, we speak. And these are things, the doctor that amputated the leg, these are things that people won't forget. One nurse from a nearby town self-deployed, again, special set of skills. She entered the building, was hit in the head by falling debris and died. And there's a relatively famous picture of an officer holding her. Well, that's something the officer never forgets. So these are pretty far-reaching events, and then 3 decades of them has some weight.
Yeah. I want to discuss a little bit the memorial at Oklahoma City at the bombing site. Mary Pat, referenced it a little bit earlier with the tree and that, but it's been 30 years since the bombing. What do you specifically remember about the community going through that helped it to heal? The grieving process for the families, I'm sure, was quite difficult, especially with all the funerals going on. And really for first responders as well, there's a healing process as well. So if you could speak a little bit to that.
It's a beautiful place. It's very well done. The footprint of the building now has hand-hewn glass and bronze chairs to commemorate each life that was lost. The street that was torn up had a 32-foot hole blown in it, is now a reflecting pool. The survivor tree, there's one planted here. The 20th anniversary, the memorial gave me a sapling, and now it's in my front yard with a piece of granite from the building. It's special to me. I'll be giving a talk there Friday afternoon, actually, 4:30 on Friday. I'll be down at the memorial. So it's an important place, and people come from around the world. It's unique. We had a 9/11 ceremony before Director Ray left, and I was invited to go tour the 9/11 museum, and actually part of that was designed after those designers came to see the Oklahoma City Memorial.
Okay, I didn't know that, and that's another powerful place, the 9/11
Very
Memorial,
powerful.
and a difficult site to get through as well.
Yes.
How can each of us as individuals keep alive the memory of those who were murdered that day?
Well, it's community. In Oklahoma, it's a relatively small place. At the time, the greater Oklahoma City area was about 1 million people. But it's hard to find somebody that didn't know somebody that was directly touched by it. And these anniversaries, sadly, come too frequently. There are more of them. This event, 9/11, there are so many tragedies. But we have to remember, and we have to learn, as I said, things that went well, surely, but also things that we can change in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned going to Oklahoma City next week. Obviously, you're here tonight. Do you find that there's still a tremendous desire for folks to learn about what happened in Oklahoma City, and do you feel that the continue to speak about it helps to prevent us from having the next Oklahoma City occur?
I think so. There's a tremendous crowd here tonight.
There is.
There's usually a significant number of people every time I go to the museum and memorial there. It's historic. One of my students had just gone through Waco, and there's a little memorial there. So these things are moments in history that I think we have to remember or be doomed to repeat.
Nothing like this had really happened to that scale in our country prior to this happening. I mean, we'd obviously had the 93 bombings and, the first World Trade Center bombing. For younger members of our audience, what was the national reaction to this at the time? How was it perceived by the media, and what were some prominent reactions of local figures and national figures?
I think the best adjective would be shock. As I said, people anticipate these types of events, maybe not of that scale because it had not been seen before, but to have it impact the heartland. There are many people may have never been to or heard of Oklahoma City at the time, and then to have an event of that magnitude happen there, I think was the most stunning thing. Larger cities have different base of resources, right? But everybody came together, that Oklahoma standard, to put together what we needed, and then the national resources showed up.
Okay. And I don't know if we may discuss this a little bit, but was it just proximity that he picked Oklahoma City, or why Oklahoma City as opposed to a federal building in upstate New York or Kansas, Wisconsin, or Michigan? I'm sorry.
He was living in Kingman, Arizona, with the 40As, and then Terry Nichols was in Junction City, Marion, Kansas area. So it was proximity to his routine route, plus access. Now there's what we call standoff or separation. That's why you can't park in front of the airport anymore. This building, you could literally drive up to the curb, and that's exactly what he did. We believe he lit 2 burning time fuses, drove the device hot through a traffic light, parked it in front of the building, walked away to the getaway car, which we later recovered. And there was some indication that he thought some of the agencies involved in the Waco events were housed there as well.
Okay. Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about counterterrorism work, both in terms of public perception and the reality of on the ground? I mean, we talked a little bit about the television model of figured out in 60 seconds and everything's wrapped up cleanly. But for those in the audience who are wondering, what are some of the misconceptions out there?
The threats are real. They're exceptionally dangerous and more prevalent than we may think. The amount of work that goes into preventing an event, and then if we're unable to prevent it, following that through a criminal conviction is really quite difficult, right? Everybody's entitled to a fair trial. You have to establish probable cause for warrants. Our system of justice is, I think, the best in the world, but it's not easy, and we can't take shortcuts just because something bad has happened.
Yeah. Well, I agree with all that, and I think the you don't have a domestic terrorism statute, right, in the United States.
Right.
There isn't one as there is on the international side, and so what you're looking for, one, you've got to protect against free speech, right, because so much of what these groups espouse is free speech, leading up to the attacks, and that's not prosecutable, and what you're looking for, right, is somebody with a weapons violation. Somebody driving with a license plate, in this case. You're looking for other criminal activity that they've engaged in order to be able to kind of actually step in and prosecute, prior to an attack happening.
Al
right?
Capone was taken down for tax charges.
100%, right? Yeah. And so it does make that difficult. Speak a little bit maybe to the disjointed nature of some of these groups. I think, from a perception standpoint, I think a lot of folks look at them as these big kind of structured organizations, but I think a lot of times there's, people falling in and out of those groups, and, that makes it a little bit more difficult in order to track them.
So the global war on terror, right, the military conflict and the counterterrorism initiatives that are commonly known as the global war on terror, was very effective in dismantling cohesive groups. You think of the leaders of Al-Qaeda, right, were eventually removed. Now they're left with a more disjointed network, again with the internet, lone wolf attacks, by their nature are just difficult. If, in this case, Nichols and McVeigh conspired, 2 people, one person, if they don't tell anybody anything, is going to be difficult to prevent. So as they're brought through that radicalization process, in the basement or at a library computer, it's very difficult to detect the lone wolf attacks.
Absolutely. You now teach classes at the Forensic Science Institute at the University of Central Oklahoma. How is retirement from the FBI suited you, and do you ever plan to publish a book about this experience or about your experiences?
when I retired after 31 years of this kind of work, I intended to just fish, play golf, do something. But the former director of the DNA lab started this Forensic Science Institute. It's just miles from my home, and it's an opportunity to, I like to think, shape the future of our line of work. I've had students come back that have joined the FBI, DEA, Secret Service, local police, state police, and it's nice to see that the things they're learning are applicable. I will say, since you asked, just last week, the FBI approved a manuscript I've been working on since retirement, and I'm hopeful that might get published one day. If there's someone out there, I'd be happy to talk with you. But yeah, that just happened last week. So
that's amazing. Is there a working title?
I've got to work on that yet. So
you're still working on the title? All right, maybe the audience has some.
I'll take suggestions.
Some options. Sure. I want to take a couple questions that come out of the audience here. Have there been any copycats that planned or perpetrated similar crimes to the McVeighs? And in essence, what was McVeigh's and Nichols' impact on the rest of the community, and how did their message resonate with other anti-government folks?
It is a sad commentary that McVeigh's name is often invoked in other events. I had planned to retire after 30 years, but a man I had convicted for planning to bomb a police station had met another man while he was a fugitive, and this other individual confided that he wanted to blow up the Federal Reserve Building. He wanted to bomb like McVeigh. He had similar sentiments. And when one invokes McVeigh's name in Oklahoma, that gets attention. So we worked an undercover operation well after my planned retirement date. And this man built what he thought was a 1,000-pound vehicle-borne IED, delivered it. If you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, what do we say? Don't talk about Fight Club.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about Fight Club. But he wanted to reset everyone's debt clock by blowing up the Federal Reserve Building. Well, then you realized you're going to drive a bomb to Washington and you might get caught. So then actually he was going to destroy the IRS building here in Dallas. Then picked a local, what was then one of the largest banks in the state of Oklahoma. It was a little bit closer. And delivered the bomb and dialed the code to detonate it 3 times, not knowing that it dialed my cell phone, and we arrested him then. So
that's an amazing story, and and I think one that has been repeated multiple times. Not to by the Bureau, right? I mean, in order to prevent those attacks that you talked about earlier, and kind of to help to keep folks safe. And it is, I think, a sad state of affairs that folks like McVeigh and many of the school shooters and many of those who have carried out other attacks, do become heroes for those people in the communities who share similar viewpoints, and they almost become, martyrs for the cause. And I think, to the, and that's a sad state of affairs, as we look at those. What psychological and physical impacts remain for those that survived? I know that the survivors of 9/11 developed cancers and other ailments after the event. Is there anything affecting the Oklahoma City survivors, either on a physical side or on continued emotional side, which I would imagine for some there is?
It's been 30 years, right? So some of the children that survived, they're now young adults. Some of the survivors, we obviously have a memorial every April 19. Many of them still come. I go to the big ones. It's difficult for me. There's parts of the museum memorial I don't go to when I give talks down there. But I think it's important to understand. I mentioned the doctor that amputated Diane's leg, the officer that held the nurse as she died. The first responder community carries this with them. More first responders that responded to 9/11 have died than victims that day. 8 years after my deployment, I was diagnosed with an exceptionally rare form of cancer. It took 3 pathologists to figure it out, a 6-hour surgery to excise it. So every time I shave, I have that scar to go over, literally. But yeah, I think it's important that people remember, unlike on TV, you don't solve a crime and then just put it on a shelf. You carry that with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think law enforcement is often, kind of to their own detriment, doesn't want to accept kind of that psychological service afterwards, to kind of talk about what happened. I think there's an aura or a mystique that you just try to put up, and I think that's changing a little bit. But I don't know that was the case back in 1995. And how have the first responders kind of healed from the devastation that they've seen, and how were you able to help heal at the time?
Well, you look with our military partners and law enforcement, the rate of suicide is high. The things that the daily job shows you are difficult to deal with over time. I say faith, friends, family, you have to have some positive way to deal with those things. You don't necessarily want to bring those sights and sounds home, but you have to have a positive way. You can't go kick the dog or drugs or alcohol or something like that. You have to have some other way to deal with that. Otherwise, it will kind of eat you alive.
Did McVeigh's family know about his political ideology, and what was their reaction to his crimes?
His sister, he and his sister corresponded to the point where in one letter he said, don't write anymore. The G-men may get these letters. There was some communication. You have to feel a little sorry for his parents, right? You can do the best you can with your kids, and
Sure.
and there you go. But it was you can get into the whole background and his time in the Army and all that. But this was a decision he made on his own with forethought and planning, and he murdered 168 innocent people.
Yeah. One of the audience members referenced that there seems to be a number of former military folks or folks who were not successful in getting into the military who seem to perpetrate these types of attack. Is there anything from a profile standpoint that you've seen that kind of, increases somebody with that background's interest in or exposure to these types of ideologies that would lead to this type of attack?
I don't know that there's any correlation. I'm certainly unfamiliar with any. I mean, most of our warfighters are true patriots,
Agreed.
Right? PTSD is a real thing and needs attention. I think what's just as detrimental are all these active shooter video games that people spend hundreds of hours with.
Yeah.
We know that some of them are used as training aids for terrorists because they're just, those of you that have been to the Citizens Academy may have used the FAT system.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a homemade FAT system, basically.
How does the FBI profile folks like Timothy McVeigh? How does the Bureau try to identify them beforehand and stop attacks going forward?
Well, it's the profilers, as it's called in the movies, the behavioral analysis unit, do a great job with information they have. But again, somebody has to bring that information to the forefront, notify law enforcement that somebody may have the potential to do something. So really it goes back to your neighbor, your friend, your parent, kid, whoever has these propensities. They have to be taken seriously and reported so that some action can be taken to stop a horrible event.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think too many people, kind of dismiss it away, right? I mean, to some degree or other, they don't want to, turn on a friend. They don't want to turn on a family member. And unfortunately, many, the guilt that they have to live with afterwards is often, extreme, for not having done that. And do you think the impact and influence of social media on acts of terror and calls for terrorist action presents an existential threat to our society?
I think the way the internet works provides a place for those things to live and grow. First Amendment here, we have that right to free speech.
Right.
So it's that gray line. Can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? So it's the totality of circumstances, the speech, then some overt act. If someone's online in their chat room, I'm going to bomb a building, and then we see them buying components for IEDs. Well, that's a line of reasoning that we can put together. But again, it takes information. It's not as if the government has wiretaps and is reading everybody's mail, regardless of what the TV says.
Correct. I think I have about 7,000 unread emails in mine. I certainly didn't have time to read everybody else's. What happened to the 40As?
Our job as law enforcement is to gather evidence that's gathered in such a way that it can be introduced and used in trial. The prosecutors make decisions about the case, the criminal charges and prosecution. So it was determined that the 40A's testimony was sufficiently important to support the other evidence that a plea agreement was reached through the Department of Justice, wherein Michael 40A would have to plead guilty to a litany of felonies, one of which was called misprision of a felony, where he failed to tell anybody what was going to happen. But the bombing was funded through a theft of some weapons, and he had transported those weapons across state lines. So some of that factored into the charges he had to plead to. But then his wife, Lori, part of their deal was that she would not be prosecuted in return for their testimony. One thing 40A had said that was relatively important, when he was first approached, he lied to the FBI about his knowledge and McVeigh's involvement. He said he and McVeigh knew each other from the Army, but McVeigh would never do that, and he surely didn't have any foreknowledge of it. Well, we had introduced some electronic devices into the 40A's home and recorded conversations of Michael and Lori talking about it. And once he realized we could prove that he had prior knowledge, he decided that maybe a plea agreement was a better way to go. And he told us on that reconnaissance trip he took with McVeigh that McVeigh was going to use an alleyway behind, it was the YMCA at the time, as a blast shield and have the getaway car there. Well, lying to the FBI is a felony.
It is.
Right? And if we're going to use 40A as a witness, we had to kind of resurrect his veracity. So my partner, Jim Norman, went through the 238,000 photographs we took during the course of that investigation and found a close-up from our ERT photographer of a Ford key. Well, we knew we were looking for a Ford Motor product. So Jim and I took the key down to Ford Motor, asked them if they could recreate the ignition of the truck that delivered the bomb. And they did, and this was the key. Now, why that's important is that key was recovered in the alley behind the Y, right where 40A said McVeigh was going to be, and so we were able to say he was telling the truth.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing work. And you know, you talk about the evidence, but I think I read somewhere that there were close to 3 billion different items that were reviewed at some point or another, whether that be travel records, credit card records, physical evidence.
So when McVeigh was seen at the Dreamland Motel, Leah McGowan recalled he was first in a yellow Mercury and then later saw him in a yellow Ryder truck. We have to exhaust those details, so we went through 3.1 million Ryder truck records to show that Timothy McVeigh had never rented a truck.
Wow, that adds up quickly. You spoke about the positive synergy that exists from coordination of law enforcement agencies. How has the coordination shifted in response to both this attack and later on 9/11 attacks? How has it changed from what it was early in your career?
The Bureau's jurisdiction really hasn't changed. The FBI has always been responsible for acts of domestic and international terrorism. In some places, there is a healthy competition between agencies. But the fact of the matter is the FBI has the resources and the budget. Ideally, we're designed with a global perspective and training that we can bring to domestic events. So we really have to check egos at the door and utilize all the assets at your disposal, every tool in the toolbox to get to the end of that mission.
Yeah. Speaking of tools, what does the Bureau or other law enforcement agencies provide for victims, survivors, families? How does the FBI in particular and law enforcement in general take care of those folks who are victims of these types of attacks?
So it's relatively new. Back in the 80s when I started, it didn't exist so much, but now there's a dedicated office of victim witness assistance programs. And I still have a great relationship with the FBI office in Oklahoma City, and I have the victim witness specialist come talk to my students. The Bureau will provide resources not only for first responders, but also, for instance, money if their family can't get here to the scene. After the shooting in Las Vegas, there was a lot of personal property that was just left at the concert venue. Well, a lot of people wanted their loved one's stuff back. So Victim Witness Assistance Program had a warehouse, cataloged and categorized all of that, and then opened up basically a website, an 800 number to give people their property back. So there's a significant effort in place to make sure that those follow-up services are available.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Vegas piece, and one of the interesting piece, right, whether 80,000 items or whatever the case may be, all those have to be cleaned beforehand, right? I mean, they have to be decontaminized because, it was a crime scene. There's, various things there. So, I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work that they do, and I think it's there's more and more local departments that are doing them, and certainly the U.S. Attorney's Office has victim witness assistance folks as well, and more departments are having those as well. How have terrorist threats shifted in nature since the Oklahoma City bombing, and what is the current threat landscape?
The threat posture currently is quite high. It doesn't feel like there's a difference between international terrorism and domestic terrorism. If a bomb blows up outside your building, it's going to feel the same way. But what's important is the motivation behind that event. As you mentioned, there is no domestic terrorism statute. You can't charge somebody with domestic terrorism. There's that underlying criminal act. But as people's sentiments become stronger, and if society, this is just my personal opinion, if society begins to accept violence as a way to resolve issues, then I think we're just going to perpetuate these things.
We may have touched on this a little bit earlier, but people under 30, 35 have no recollection of this event. And the event has been somewhat overshadowed, with regards to other attacks that have happened since then, and just really the passage of time on that. How can we keep the memory of those that perished alive for future generations?
Well, again, it's the memorials, and as I believe we said earlier, sadly there are so many that come now. Uvalde, the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, there were lives lost at the Olympic bombing, right? So these anniversaries seem to recur much more frequently, almost to the point where it's lost as background noise. But each one claimed lives, and I think we have to remember those people, as well as pursue justice for the people that perpetrated those acts.
Yeah. As you kind of navigated various events and critical incidences in your career, did it get easier for you to deal with over time, or was the impact the same each one, and each one have a different impact for you?
I think what's most difficult is when you know people firsthand. In 1995, there was no direct deposit. We got paid with a paper paycheck every other Thursday, and I would go to the credit union, and there were young ladies my age that would take my check and deposit it. They were all killed. There were federal agents we knew, my wife and I knew, that were killed. Each event is horrible, but we lost an FBI bomb technician when the trade centers collapsed, Lenny Hatton. Yeah. It's not that the others are less bad, but when there's a personal connection, those are the ones that I think stick more closely to your heart.
Sure. we talk about wanting to remember. We talk about, kind of continuing to solve these problems. What advice would you give to any young people in our audience today who have interest in becoming a law enforcement officer, who want to get into the forensic science field or work in the criminal justice field? What would you tell them, and what's your advice?
A vocation in service is always good, right? Willing to serve your country, your fellow man. When I was a 10-year-old kid, and less than 6% of the people get to do what you and I got to do, it would have been easy for my folks or my coach to say, yeah, why don't you look into something else? So if you have a dream to pursue, you should absolutely pursue it. As if you don't try, you won't get it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think it, there's a certain passion, and we talk about it more, that it's a calling as opposed to a job. And I think that's really, the case. It's never going to be the most amount of money. It's never going to be the most kind of glory, but the ability to impact people's lives on a day in and day out basis, and to kind of bring closure to, to victims, to see justice served for those who would commit those acts, and to kind of ensure that they're not able to do that again. I don't think there's a more noble cause out there. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly and 100%. Is there something I could have asked you today or should have asked you today that we haven't covered yet, either through, my dialogue or through that of the audience? Is there?
Jim, I don't know what it would be. It was a privilege to do this job for a little over 31 years, most of my adult life. Starting when I was 24, to think we would be sitting here now in front of this esteemed group is really difficult to believe. But that I got to travel the world, see some amazing things, some not so good, but just the opportunity to serve was a real blessing.
Yeah, and I think if those things are going to happen, right, you want to be at the table, right? You want a seat at the table. You want your skills to be able to kind of help that, and that's a tremendous blessing, I think, as well. So I've got one final question here. What lessons should we all take away from the tragedy of Oklahoma City, and what gives you hope for the future?
I think the important thing to remember is that hatred does not prevail. It doesn't work. McVeigh's primary goal was to start a revolution of like-minded people, and it just didn't happen. He was executed, and his co-conspirator will never see the light of day. Spend the rest of his life in a supermax facility in Florence, Colorado. I do think there are more good people out there than not, and that's what I choose to focus on.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to look at it, and I've enjoyed our opportunity to talk this evening. I enjoyed getting to know you a little bit over the last little bit, and I really thank you for the tremendous career that you had and the service that you had to this nation and to the people of it. So thank you very much for spending some time with us in Dallas today, and thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. And then, and she's already here.
I'm here, yeah. Barry and Jim, thank you both so much for this conversation and for your service to our country and our communities. I know we rely greatly on our relationships with law enforcement at the museum, and we're very grateful. And I'm sorry that you for the struggles, for the hurt that you've felt, but it has made a huge difference in so many people's lives, and we're grateful. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I hope you'll consider coming back next week on April 7th. We're starting a new crucial conversation series focused on confronting anti-Semitism. It's a 3-part series, and we'd love to have you along that journey of learning with us, because it's a type of hatred that is exploding right now, and is often a precursor to all sorts of other hatred. Anti-Semitism is often the canary in the coal mine and a harbinger for an explosion of other hatred. So we need to understand it and be able to confront it. And I hope that you will come and learn with us next week. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.